On March 21, 2022, China Eastern Flight 5735 was cruising at 29,100 ft above the mountains of Guangxi Province. 132 people were aboard the Boeing 737-800 that afternoon, flying from Kuning to Guangzhou on what should have been a routine domestic flight across southern China. At 2:20 p.m., air traffic controllers in Guangzhou watched something on their radar screens that defied explanation. The aircraft's altitude reading began dropping, not gradually, like an emergency descent, not erratically, like a mechanical failure. The Boeing 737 was falling straight down at nearly vertical angles, plummeting toward the forested mountains below at speeds that should not be possible for a commercial airliner. Less than 2 minutes later, Flight 5735 slammed into a mountainside in Wuzhou, creating a crater so deep that investigators would spend weeks just trying to reach the wreckage. There were no survivors, but more disturbing than the tragedy itself was what came next. For over 4 years, the Chinese government remained virtually silent about what caused this Boeing 737 to fall like a stone from the sky. No mechanical failure was announced. No pilot error was cited. No explanation was given to the families. But in May 2026, newly released documents from American investigators revealed something that changes everything. According to flight data recovered by the National Transportation Safety Board, the fuel cut switches in the cockpit were deliberately moved before the crash. Someone on that flight deck made a conscious decision to cut off the fuel supply to both engines while cruising at altitude. The question that haunts aviation experts around the world is simple. Who made that decision and why? The morning of March 21 started like any other at Kuning Chong International Airport. The Boeing 737-800, registered as B1791, had arrived the previous evening from its home base in Shanghai. The aircraft was almost 7 years old, well-maintained, and had logged over 18,000 flight hours without any significant mechanical issues. Captain Yang Hongge had been flying for China Eastern for over a decade. His first officer, Zhang Zhongping, was a highly respected former captain with over 31,000 flight hours. A third pilot, Nidai Dongping, was also seated in the cockpit as an observer. All three men had clean safety records and were considered among the airline's most professional teams. Flight 5735 pushed back from the gate at 1:11 p.m., departing right on schedule. The weather was clear across their route, with unlimited visibility and calm winds. As the Boeing 737 climbed through the scattered clouds above Kunming, everything appeared normal. Air traffic control recordings from that day show routine communications between the crew and ground controllers. The pilots acknowledged altitude assignments, reported their position, and followed standard procedures as they climbed to their assigned cruising altitude of 29,100 ft. For nearly an hour, the flight proceeded without incident. Passengers settled in for what should have been a 2-hour journey across the mountainous terrain of southern China. The aircraft maintained its assigned altitude and airspeed, following the published route toward Guangzhou exactly as planned. 2:20 p.m., everything changed. Air traffic controllers at the Guangzhou Area Control Center first noticed the altitude discrepancy just after 2:20 p.m. The Boeing 737's transponder was indicating a rapid descent, but the controllers initially assumed it was an equipment malfunction. Modern commercial aircraft do not simply fall out of the sky without warning, but this was not a transponder error. Multiple radar installations across southern China were painting the same terrifying picture. Flight 5735 was descending at rates that exceeded 31,000 ft per minute. A normal descent for landing is typically between 1,000 and 2,000 ft per minute. Controllers immediately attempted to contact the crew. The radio calls went unanswered. Emergency frequencies were tried. Nothing. The Boeing 737 continued its vertical plunge toward the Earth, accelerating as it fell through the atmosphere at speeds approaching the aircraft's structural limits. Witnesses on the ground described seeing the aircraft in a nose-down attitude so steep that the plane appeared to be diving straight into the mountain's side. Unlike typical aircraft accidents where debris is scattered over miles, Flight 5735 impacted the forest near Wuzhou with such force that it created a crater 66 ft deep and buried most of the wreckage underground. The Civil Aviation Administration of China, CAAC, immediately launched an investigation, but from the very beginning, their silence was deafening. While aviation authorities worldwide waited for preliminary findings, Chinese officials provided only the most basic details about the accident. Recovery teams worked around the clock in the remote mountainous terrain to locate the aircraft's flight data recorders. The black boxes designed to survive the most catastrophic crashes held the key to understanding what happened in those final terrifying minutes aboard Flight 5735. After days of searching through the crater and surrounding forest, investigators finally located both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. The boxes were severely damaged from the high-speed impact, but data recovery specialists were optimistic that the information inside could still be extracted. Months passed. The international aviation community waited for answers. Boeing offered its expertise to assist with the investigation. American aviation authorities stood ready to help, but Chinese officials remained silent, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. Meanwhile, families of the victims demanded answers. How does a modern commercial aircraft simply fall from the sky? What did the black boxes reveal about those final moments in the cockpit? The silence became more puzzling when leaked reports in 2022 suggested that investigators had successfully extracted data from both flight recorders, pointing toward intentional human inputs pushing the plane into a dive. But still, no official final report was released. The families of 132 victims were left to wonder what really happened to their loved ones in the final moments of Flight 5735. Then in May 2026, information released from the NTSB via public records request cast the entire tragedy in a sharper, more terrifying light. According to the extracted flight data, the fuel cutoff switches in the cockpit had been deliberately moved to the cutoff position before the crash. These center pedestal switches control the flow of fuel to the engines. Intentionally cutting fuel to both engines at cruising altitude is virtually unprecedented in modern aviation history. This revelation raises disturbing questions. Was this a conscious decision made by a pilot or the result of a desperate struggle for control? Once the fuel flow is cut, the engines lose power within seconds. Without thrust, the aircraft begins to descend. However, a Boeing 737 is designed to glide for extended periods, and skilled pilots have successfully landed aircraft after total engine failure numerous times. But Flight 5735 did not glide to an emergency landing. Instead, the aircraft entered an unroverable dive. The silence surrounding Flight 5735 has become almost as troubling as the crash itself. Someone in that Boeing 737 cockpit made a deliberate choice to doom the aircraft. Understanding who made that choice and why is the only way to prevent it from happening again. Until the full truth is shared, the plane that fell from 29,100 ft will remain one of modern aviation's most disturbing unsolved mysteries.